Welcome to Transformation 2.0, the podcast for change leaders. My name is Chamar Somaratna, and in each episode, we bring you real conversations with executives, innovators, and experts who are shaping the future of business. Whether you are leading a team, scaling a company, or navigating the challenges of transformation, this podcast will provide you with insights, strategies, and inspiration to drive meaningful change. Join us as we explore what it takes to lead, adapt, and thrive in an ever-evolving world. Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of Transformation 2.0. Today we are talking about corporate innovation in pharma, looking at rapid experimentation, learning cultures, and the future of digital health. I'm pleased to have Stephen Ranjan on the show today. It's my pleasure to welcome Stephen on Transformation 2.0. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Tamara. I'm really excited to be here and have this discussion with you.
So for our guests' benefit, Stephen is a seasoned healthcare executive and a collaborative leader with over 20 years of experience in building high-performance teams and launching innovative digital health products across the globe. He currently serves as the global head of digital health at Roche, where he has driven strategic partnerships between pharmaceutical companies and leading technology innovators, significantly enhancing market presence and competitive advantage. Throughout his career, Stephen has held impactful roles at organizations such as Epic, the University of Wisconsin, Johnson & Johnson, Janssen, the pharma division of J&J, Merck and Company, and of course at Roche. Additionally, he serves as the board of trustees at West Virginia Wesleyan College and an executive advisory board member of Erdman Center at the Wisconsin School of Business. Stephen has always been passionate about coaching and mentoring emerging leaders, empowering teams to continuously exceed their business objectives. His strategic vision, combined with his commitment to people development and continuous innovation. Stephen, thank you for joining us today. Let's dive in.
Sounds good.
I think off the bat, what I wanted to talk about is more just a little bit about challenges and opportunities in pharma innovation today. Why does traditional approaches to innovation struggle in the pharmaceutical industry, and how have you looked at overcoming some of these barriers in innovation and in a highly regulated industry such as health pharma?
Yeah, that's great. Great question. And maybe just to get the audience grounded, when we talk about, pharma innovation, it's a fairly long process because you've got to go from first identifying, a target or a molecule that, would have an impact, would have clinical benefit for a patient, and that starts as early as experiments in the lab, then moving to maybe some animal testing, and then ultimately coming into human testing. And through all of this process, you've got to make sure that the drug is safe, efficacious, and has the has the business potential in the market. And so these are fairly long processes. We're talking about 10 to 15 years from bench to bedside, and can be quite expensive. We're talking about anywhere about $2 billion in costs, and over time, as many can imagine, we're working in the healthcare industry, so regulation plays a key role, and so you have to make sure that you're addressing the needs of all of the different countries across the globe. And so these are kind of, I would say, the typical things that pharma companies have to work through as they go through the product innovation. And I would say that there's an entire ecosystem in the in the drug discovery and development space. But as we start to kind of bring in digital and AI capabilities into the mix, you're seeing kind of new opportunities emerge. I think just from as I described the long cycle time for products to come into market, you're seeing the data, the digital tools, and now more recently the AI capabilities helping accelerate some of those steps, whether it's in discovery, finding the right target, using digital twin models to be able to kind of test, certain hypotheses. But it's also bringing some interesting changes in when you start to think about business models that pharma could explore, and how you might go to market with some of your products. How do you think about combining digital into your product? But these are not easy to work through, and this is where my career, because you're in a highly regulated industry, you also need to be extremely thoughtful about how you're introducing some of the capabilities. And so one needs to kind of embrace these new capabilities, these new technologies, keeping in mind what the organizational context is, what's the risk for patients, and ultimately, how do you create that learning mindset in the organization so when's the right time to actually pull through. But I think there's huge potential, and we'll continue to see progress in this space. And I'm excited to see what some of the newer capabilities of AI are bringing and how that'll transform this industry.
Interesting. Thank you for that detailed explanation. I'm quite looking forward to what's going to evolve in this space myself.
Yeah.
And I think, the opportunities that technology provides are quite exciting. But I think, as you said, like rightfully, I think the challenge is how do we make sure we introduce it at the right time to solve the right problem? And most importantly, do we have the right skills and the tech and the data in place to make sure that we can address that, right?
Yeah.
And I think maybe diving into the next question, what I want to look at is obviously you spoke a lot about how the research and R&D times for developing some of these drugs can be quite lengthy, right? So looking at some of the other industries where when it comes to rapid experimentation, it's relatively easy to design an experiment that you want to run quite quickly and get some data and make some sensible decisions. But obviously, considering the nature of pharma business, what does rapid experimentation and sort of the building a culture of rapid experimentation in pharma look like from your experience? And then I guess maybe looking at it, what are some of the elements of leadership and the mindset shift that we need to address as we are bringing people into that mindset? Because traditionally, I know a lot of people in this space have been, people who are doing research for years and years and years before they can actually commercialize something. They'll actually develop the drug, and sometimes it might even actually sit on a shelf for a while before it's commercialized, right? But now with a lot of the capabilities that we have at our disposal, this model is starting to change a little bit. So what are some of the elements that the leaders need to start addressing in order to sort of get them to go through that mindset shift?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in pharma, rapid experimentation definitely looks different than what, excuse me, what you might see in, like a
retail, for example,
non-healthcare setting, or even in maybe like, consumer health, where you might be able to kind of, test your hypothesis and your experiment more quickly. And so, at least what my learning has been in this space, because I have introduced various rapid experimentation models, but mostly in the context of digital health, not in the kind of the drug discovery and development concept. So I'll kind of use that to explain kind of principles that are true. I think one of the key things, especially for leaders, is to ensure that you're building a culture of curiosity and learning, and that requires shifting from what you might be used to kind of looking at, what customers are telling you or what customers are saying, to focusing more on sort of what's the behavior that you're observing. And so how might you understand through various types of experiments that you could do to understand the behavior of adopting something novel or new, and how do you bring that into a regulated context? And so part of that, the next element is making sure that you can really separate out, what's your core business and what cannot be disrupted, and where can you maybe create a space to learn. And so creating this sort of space to learn that is fitting within your kind of your regulatory and your compliance framework allows the teams to kind of create that curiosity mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you kind of built that muscle of curiosity, then you're starting to kind of ask the question, what is it going to take to integrate this into the core areas of the business? What needs to change? How might we change this? And so now you're shifting a little bit more into some of the change management, but hopefully through the learning process, you've understood what are some of the riskiest areas in the business, where you do need to have some good controls in place. And then accordingly, you can work with the right stakeholders. And then the last element, depending on your organization, the larger you are, the more important it is for having stakeholder engagement and alignment. Without that, a lot of these kind of rapid experimentations are bound to fail. There'll be good pilots or good learnings, but they don't end up scaling in the organization. And so what my personal learning in this as a leader is, it comes down to the vision and the strategy that you're setting for the team. You need to kind of help them understand why we want a different way of working. Why do we need this ambidextrous model of learning while also trying to integrate the learnings into the core business? We need to be, have a sense of humility to be curious and learning and not be caught with this is how we've done things. And so we are not going to change it. And so as a leader, there's an element of humility and curiosity that you need to bring out. And then I would say the third element that's been important is actually paying attention to the friction points in the organization.
Yeah.
Because, and you've talked about this with other, people on your podcast. When you're bringing in something new, it is going to have an impact on the way things are done. And it all comes down to is how we integrate the new ways of working with the existing, where that evolution needs to happen. And if it's not done well, the friction is high, and and you can see. I think an analogy I've used is it's like organ rejection. Right?
Yeah.
You try to transplant and then it just doesn't fit. And so I think the leaders need to pay attention to that, because this is what we've seen in other corporate innovation. And so as a leader, if you're paying attention to that, then you can at least help lower the friction that might exist.
No, thank you for that, sharing that. And I think like there's two elements there that kind of stood out to me. One is obviously like the change of mindset and sort of the adaptation in terms of how do we move into the space of trying to experiment quickly and get some data and make a decision. But at the same time, I think the point you mentioned about, yes, there are still parts of our business that are quite prone to risk and that we need to safeguard. And I think like understanding that difference between our risk management frameworks need to have a level of flexibility around sort of where we need more rigor in terms of managing risks thoroughly, and where we need a little bit more flexibility. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen quite often. A lot of large organizations tend to get wrong because they have one risk management framework and everything is sort of managed by that, and everyone sort of like applies that. And I think like the point that you highlighted around yes, we need to understand this difference in terms of how we navigate. It's important, and I think that sets up now nicely for the next question I want to talk about, which is more when it comes to pharma innovation. What's the role of strategic partnerships, and sort of how does it serve as a catalyst for innovation? And I think to me, I feel like this is an area where you can apply some methodology around managing the risks differently, because now you have partners that don't have the same level of exposure as the sort of the main organization, right?
Yeah.
And sorry.
Yeah, I mean, in general, pharma, does stay active in strategic partnerships, and but when you look at it through the lens of how do you use strategic partnerships to catalyze a different way of working in the organization? I think this is where I've seen, kind of taking that digital health lens, a huge opportunity, right? Because a lot of times, pharma has been building this expertise of digital health and data science in the organization, but because you have a very well established and regulated business, sometimes it can be challenging to learn quickly within your own confines. Mm-hmm. And this is where working with strategic partners, whether they are large groups or small groups, becomes a great way to kind of create that learning environment that I mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. And there are two examples that I'll call out to that I've done that have served me well. One was kind of working, this was a few years back, working with Amazon and the Alexa team to kind of explore the art of the possible of voice technology in healthcare, and more specifically in diabetes management. Right? And this is before today's kind of prevalence of voice,
large language models.
Yeah, and we wanted to kind of show sort of what the value of voice is to addressing a disease that has so much burden on the patient. Uh-huh. And here, an open innovation challenge where you brought, the Amazon team, in this case, the pharma company, Merck Sharp and Dome, and the startups, to really kind of, explore the art of possible, was a great way to kind of create those learnings that then led to, other conversations around opportunities within the organization. And, and so to me, I think that's one great way. Mm-hmm. The other way that I, especially when you're kind of exploring business model innovation, mm-hmm. right? You're looking at new business models. You have to think about what are the changes that need to happen from your marketing standpoint, from your sales, from your go-to-market. So there's a lot of change that you need to do. And sometimes finding startups that have a well-defined product and are going after a complementary, space, you can start to kind of think about how do you create collaborations with these startups to help you prove whether you can scale. Now, one of the challenges we face there, I would say, is most startups have struggled to scale that partnership. It kind of gets stuck in pilot purgatory, unfortunately. But I think here, again, this comes back to, if you're in the pharma, if you're in a leadership role in pharma, I think one of the key things I learned is, if some of these open innovation activities don't have a landing spot inside the core business, mm-hmm. then they're bound to fail.
Yeah.
And this goes back to understanding that, where are you exploring and where are you executing?
Where's the complementarity, right?
Yeah. And you need to know sort of how you fit them together. And if you don't design that fit, then you end up having this as kind of an island of its own, where you get these great learnings.
Yeah, it's just another complexity that you added into the organization.
Exactly. And so as a leader, if you are intentional about that, and you design this dual system to explore and execute, and you've integrated the mechanisms, then I think your odds of success become a lot higher.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think maybe just around that, then I guess looking at things like the people factor around that, what role does mentorship, empowerment, and learning play? And I guess maybe from your experience, what's the typical challenges that you come across when you're working with young leaders, or even like being able to create that learning environment and the psychological safety and accountability that's required for actually driving this change? Because it's easy to say, but it's harder to create it, right? That's my experience, at least. It's easier to talk about it and say this is what we need, but when you really go in and start working side by side with people, to really create that environment and like really be on the pulse in terms of understanding how does what I as a leader am going to say gonna impact the environment and the experience that I'm trying to create, right? What are some of the
Yeah.
challenges that you navigated around that?
Yeah. So I would say over the years, probably, my journey also has kind of shifted in the sense that I started off, in the realm of product innovation, and, focused a lot on that. Evolved over time to kind of think more from a business model innovation perspective. But where I've landed, especially in the context of large organizations, is that you still need to be focused on the business model. I think product innovation is too narrow. You need our world is fairly complex, and so you need to kind of be thinking about it in terms of systems. But in order for the system to work, it's the people and the processes that they are familiar with that make that system work. And so if you're trying to innovate, which is usually you're trying to do something different than what is there, whether it's an incremental or a
Radical,
transformative innovation, you're trying to do something different. And most, young leaders that come into pharma or med tech, and they tend to be in the spaces of digital because they're excited, and they get excited about the opportunity to do things differently. And the first time they hit a brick wall because of compliance, we can't do it, or for lack of kind of stakeholder endorsement or support, the project gets stalled, or the budget gets pulled, and it leads to a lot of frustration. And so this is something that I personally went through early in my career in pharma, but also observed it in people on my team. And so one of the things that I learned or took, and try to kind of embody, and I think you touched it, is there's an element of modeling, role modeling, that leaders need to do. And for me, leading teams that were working in this space, one of the things that I needed to kind of showcase was that, these challenges that the teams are facing are real. I've experienced them myself. It's not something that we can change easily, because if depending on how well established the company is, these processes have been built for a reason. The company exists for a reason, and so if you're trying to innovate, you need to understand what that is. And so what I've tried to focus more on is help reframe, and that reframe that frustration to kind of saying, what did we learn from it? What did we learn about the organization that we need to either preserve and we're not ready to change? And so now that becomes a design constraint that we have to innovate within, rather than trying to kind of break outside of it. And so kind of, acknowledging that it is a real challenge, and then kind of helping them reframe. And that really comes down to, how we ask questions, as a leader, being a little bit more curious, starting your questions with maybe how, or, or what, or why did something happen that way, rather than telling them what to do. Those are things that I think those are simple, practical things that I think leaders can do to really start to create that culture. And then I think the last piece is being accountable to what you say. So if you don't follow through, then you're not going to create that psychological safe environment. If you are encouraging learning, you have to walk the talk.
That's it.
And and if you're not rolling up your sleeves, if you're not kind of breaking down organizational silos for the teams, or creating the alliances that are needed so that the team can kind of move through, then it's not going to work. And I know your company has been doing this transformation. You're calling yourselves Sherpas, in a way, I think as a leader in a corporate innovation setting, you're kind of playing that role.
Exactly.
You're
Yeah.
paving that way for the team, right? And so you need to anticipate where they're going to be headed, and then you need to get ahead and try to clear that, or at least make sure that they're headed in the right direction. And if they're not, coaching them to take kind of a different route around it. And so kind of that to me has been a big element of building high performing teams that even in the midst of the ups and downs of the business cycle, there's a resilience and a motivation that the team has built that allows them to keep learning and to keep kind of finding other ways to kind of get to the end goal of impacting patients.
No, I love the way you frame it in terms of what's the learning, right? Rather than focusing on the failure. I really love that. By the way, like going back to why we're calling ourselves Sherpas, it's actually mainly because we realized the way we behaved on the plant side was actually quite different to how consultants typically behave. And I've been telling myself to some of the team members that like we are not consultants, we are Sherpas, and I've been saying that for the last 5 years. But then, like at one point, at some point, I realized we could actually rebrand ourselves and put this on the label, because if I'm just the one that just keep telling people and it just becomes another message. But if we brand it ourselves, then we live that value. And to be honest, I think like a lot of our team members, the way they show up is actually this. So when we have new team members coming in, we want them to think of themselves as Sherpas, not as consultants, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the framing that I'm trying to set.
Agreed. I think to me, like when I first started some of these kind of rapid experimentation models, I would actually spend time with the team as well, because I also needed to understand their pains and their challenges.
Exactly.
And
as a leader, I think you need to live among where action happens, right? And then you get the
I think you probably are familiar with this. When we look at kind of the lean methodology and the lean principles, I mean, this is kind of like a Gemba walk.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
You go and see what's going on. And I think, unfortunately, as organizations get bigger, or as you kind of get more settled in to your, to kind of the ways of working, and the further you are from the front lines, it becomes a lot harder.
Yeah.
And for me, I think one of the concepts that I didn't realize I was actually applying it is there's this sort of team of teams concept that I think the McChrystal group works on. And to me, that this idea of kind of having these networks and nodes of connection, so that you can kind of pick up the signals, and then at what point you need to go in and observe what's going on, and not just take that data in, right? You need to be able to kind of feel it. Is a change in our data-rich, technology abundant world, and we still need that.
Absolutely,
we still need that humanness in the midst of all of this. You can't get too far, removed from what people are experiencing.
No, absolutely. And I think like the thing that you mentioned about, the leaders need to be in amongst the teams, driving. And I think like a lot of what's happening in the industry in terms of digital transformations and the management innovation is actually focused on this, because like in the past, we trained people to come into an organization, and then we trained them to be managers, right? But then now the level of managers skills that you need in the future is actually going to be lesser, right? So you need people who can actually lead and be the change leaders and the people who drive the change. And I think like for us, the Sherpa branding is partly because of that as well. because when someone comes into the organization, we don't want them to be thinking, I'm going to be climbing the corporate ladder now, but rather we actually like we are in amongst the teams driving change and rolling our sleeves up, and the capability that you gain is being able to lead change, being able to tackle complex problems, right? And I think that's what's happening at the moment. And another maybe, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's extremely important that leaders focus a lot more on investing in people and how they work together.
Yeah.
Not leaving it at kind of the corporate training or the message, but really kind of understanding not only what the tone they need to set for the team, but what behaviors they as a leader need to change, right? And I think until that shift happens, you're not going to create that environment for your team to be taking risks. And for me, that's probably been the most rewarding in my career, is to be able to see people thrive, to be able to kind of get excited to take on challenges, and it's because they know that you've created that environment for them to learn, and you've got their back, and
exactly, got their back, and you open their eyes to like, yes, you've solved the small problem. Now the next challenge for you is to actually do something bigger, right? Exactly.
And that's for me, that's been sort of the most rewarding piece, is to see people grow and mature, and we need more of that, because healthcare specifically it's not a straightforward
it's one of the most complex. It's one of the most complex ecosystems. And I think I think a while back I was talking with one of the MIT professors, and I told him, like, healthcare, aged care, and pharma, they're kind of a collection of ecosystems that are actually intertwined, right? So when you're trying to drive change in this ecosystem, you need to actually think about a system of systems thinking rather than systems thinking.
Exactly. And you need to know where you fit into that mix as well.
Exactly. And I think that sets us up nicely for the last question, which I want to cover, which is more on future of digital health in pharma, and maybe looking at what are some of the emerging trends around technology shaping digital health, and how leaders can prepare their organizations to drive that continuous transformation in terms of obviously identifying new value and obviously bringing it in. Letting it settle alongside your existing core business, right? So how do you manage that? You addressed that earlier as part of one of your responses. So what are some of the things that the leaders need to be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a kind of emerging trend standpoint, I think right now, when I look at across the value chain, in drug discovery, we're seeing probably quite a bit of innovation, especially as we look at the large language model tools, or AI in general. Being able to kind of analyze large data sets, quickly identify potential targets. That's kind of definitely going to be the case, and we'll continue to see more and more the idea of digital twins, maybe over time not having to do as much animal testing, so I think we'll see kind of digital kind of playing a role there. We're also starting to see digital come into the development phase, especially when it comes to better ways to do protocol design. There's a lot of for submitting documents for regulatory purposes. There's a lot of repetitive or kind of similar steps that need to be done, and here you can use technology. So I would say that from a process innovation perspective, we're going to continue to see more and more. I think where companies will continue to be challenged is when you start to kind of go into more the adjacent and transformative areas, right? Because this starts to really kind of make you rethink the way work gets done.
Mm-hmm.
and here, I think for me, the advice I would give to leaders is, you know, always make sure you understand what are the problems that you need to be solving for in your organization, and you need to have that, kind of opportunity map or opportunity spaces that you need to be solved, and you have to have some way of prioritizing what's important for your business, and hopefully you've got an understanding of what are those problems you need to solve in the short term, your midterm, and your long term, right? And then you need to be able to then say, given where the technology is, and the maturity of the technology for the specific problem that you're going after, whether you call it a technical readiness level or a clinical evidence in the case of healthcare, because it's not just technology that you have to pay attention to. It's also clinical evidence. So that readiness, you need to be paying attention. But you then need to map that to your organizational readiness, right? Not just the market readiness. You need to make sure your organization is ready. Because in my work, I'm observing a lot of people jumping to the generative AI capabilities because that's the shiny object right now.
Exactly.
But the question is generative AI the right solution for what you are trying to work on, right? There may be other forms of AI, or some basic technology that you could be using, and sometimes in healthcare we just need simple solutions. We don't need complex things. And so being able to kind of balance that, being able to make sure that you have the right data foundation, the right governance for that data. If you don't have a lot of these basic things, if you're trying some of the newer technologies, you're bound to waste money. You're bound to kind of create a big solution only to find that there is no problem to solve behind it. And so I would encourage leaders to make sure that you're always having you're mapping your portfolio of problems along kind of the maturity of the technology that you're planning to use to solve, and the maturity of your organization in adopting that piece. And if you don't have that view, then you're not able to kind of shepherd how these things need to evolve in your organization over time.
I'm nodding my head along here thinking you're just describing two of the elements that we talk about in our AI strategy accelerator and the innovation strategy accelerator. One of them is actually what we call value model design. So in the value model design, we look at how does the organization create value and get really a thorough understanding of that, right? And then the other piece that we talk about is actually the value assessment framework. So thinking about, what are the bets that we want to put money on, what are the ones that we want to let go of, right? And I think
exactly.
when you're talking about it, that's kind of like what's running through my head. In terms of the value model, we need to understand how organization creates value and how does data and AI actually add value and accelerate that. And I think the other thing, sorry, go on.
No, just to kind of build on that, I think one of the things that organizations need to think about is not to get caught up in just looking at the value from their functional point of view. You need to understand, like, if you're going to solve a problem within your functional unit, what is the implication for another function if you are working on that? And do you understand that? Because especially in a well-established organization, it's so easy to kind of be working in your functional area. But at the end of the day, if you're using any form of digital, it is cutting across.
Exactly.
And so if you don't end up looking across, and so as a leader, you need to be looking across. I think you mentioned that systems of systems, it's no longer enough to look at your own functional system. You need to be paying attention to what's happening, in the other areas, and how do you kind of connect those dots in order to maximize the investment and the learning that you're getting out from these experiments. And lastly, I would just say that, especially in the Gen AI space, I think we need to be ready for, in the next 18 months, we'll probably hear a lot of stories where people have overspent their investments and they're not getting the ROI back. And if there's anything I've learned, it's usually because you have not been clear on the problems, and you haven't created this portfolio view. And so if you are somebody listening to this podcast and you don't have that, it's the first homework you should do.
I love what you're saying. This is music to my ears. I actually spoke about this in one of our events with one of the teams from Italy called the Boundaryless. I spoke about like how we actually got started with our innovation strategy accelerator, because the first customer that we had actually came to us and said, we have this innovation team that's kind of becoming a bit of a money pit. Can we look at this and see how we can drive some value out of this? That's actually like what you just said.
It's the simple things.
Exactly. Yeah, I think like I spoke about another few concepts around like how you need to think about ROI for some of these early stage innovations in terms of two factors. One is sort of like the ROV, which is more sort of the return on value, which is usually constant based on the business and the industry you're in. And then the measure that you really need to focus on is more what we call the VOI, value on investment, right? So what's the value that you're getting from the investment? Is it about learning what the problem is and clearly defining that? Or is it, understanding who the customers are for this problem, right? So the value we need to measure in terms of like something that actually enables that. And that's an easier way to measure early stage investments in these sort of things. Stephen, I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you again for the insightful information you shared, and thank you for coming on the podcast today. That's it for today's episode of Transformation 2.0. I hope you found insights that will help you lead change with confidence. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Your support helps us bring more transformational stories to leaders like you. Stay connected with us on LinkedIn, and if you have a topic or guest you would love to hear on the show, let us know. See you next time.